Hello, dear friends. I'm continuing today with Pirkei Avot, as I do once a week, and we are still in chapter 1, and we are starting Mishnah 6. Now, again, each time we have the zugot, which means the pairs um, mentioned in chapter 1. The pairs, the first one is always the Nasi, which is the president of the Sanhedrin. Uh, and the second one is the Av Beit Din. So in this case, Joshua ben Prachiya is the Nasi, the president of the Sanhedrin, and Nitai Harbeli in Mishnah 7 would be the Av Beit Din. After the destruction of the temple, as I mentioned before, the presidents of the Sanhedrin were all from Davidic descent. However, prior to this, not necessarily. We had people like Shimon HaTzadik who actually were Kohanim, priests. In fact, there's an opinion that thinks that Joshua ben Prachiya was also a Kohen. It's not clear, but it does mention him involved in the burning of the red heifer, the ceremony which was only done by a Kohen. So that creates speculation. Was he the one who did it, or was he just helping them out? So it is possible that he was a Kohen. We also have to remember that in early times, the Kohanim were the teachers. They were the teachers because they worked in the temple. They were supported, therefore, all of the tribe of Levi were supported by the people through the Trumot Masrot, through the tithes, and therefore they were expected to give back to the people, not only by the temple, by teaching. And we find this in many places, like in Moses, when Moses talks about the tribes and he talks about Levi, he says, Yoru mishpatecha liYaakov v'toratcha liYisrael. Let them teach your precepts to Jacob and your Torah to Israel. And also in the prophets, it says, Ki siftei kohen yishmeru da'at v'torah yalamdu mipiu, because the lips of the Kohen will give knowledge and Torah will be taught from their lips. So specifically the Kohanim, but even all the tribe of Levi were considered the teachers in early times. Okay, without further ado, I'd like to talk about a little bit the statement of Joshua ben Prachiya. And after that, I want to talk about some unusual sources concerning this Joshua ben Prachiya. Joshua ben Prachiya, Anitai Harbeli Kiblu Mehem. They received from them. And Rashi writes here, what does it mean received from them? From the previous pair, Yossi ben Yoezer and Yossi ben Yochanan. Now Yoshua ben Prachiya, Hachi Havi Margala Befume. Rashi says this is the way things he used to say. Of course, in general, we might say in Pirkei Avot that the sayings here are sayings that not only are sayings from these sages, but something that reflects the ofi, the character of these sages. In earlier times, Shimon HaTzadik and Antigonos Ish Socho, which we knew very little about, it could also be a reflection about something of their generation. Now, as I mentioned also, the Maharal of Prague has this idea that among the pairs, the first one is always talking about something which has to do with the love of God, and the second one has to do with the reverence and the fear of God. Now, if we also understand that love is active, because when you give, it's an act of love, and fear is more passive, it's very easy to understand these two Mishnayot. So Joshua ben Prachiya says, Aseh lecha rav, make for yourself a rabbi. Which is interesting. Why do you have to make? Why not just take? Uknei lecha chaver, which literally now in Hebrew, knei means either to acquire, but it also could be to create. Because we know that Abraham says that God is koneh shamayim ba'aretz. He says in Genesis that God created the universe, and there he uses the word koneh. So koneh could be to create, and it could also be to acquire or to create. So make for yourself a rabbi, acquire or create for yourself a friend, ve'vedan, and judge all people meritoriously. Look at everybody meritoriously. Now, Rashi says, what does it mean, aseh lecharav? Says, basically, Rashi says, you need a rabbi because it's not good just to study by yourself. You need to study with somebody who has learning behind them. There's a lot to say about that. There's always a difference between somebody who is autodidact, who has studied by themselves, or somebody who has acquired knowledge from others. Because even when you acquire knowledge from others, obviously you're going to formulate eventually your own opinions. So, like it says in the first chapter of Tehillim, of the Psalms, Ashrei ha'ish asher lo alach b'tzat rishayim v'derech hata'im lo amad. Right, happy is the man who did not walk in the way of the sinners. Ki b'torat Hashem chavtzo, because he is interested, his desire is in God's Torah, and in his Torah he is studying day and night. And the Talmud says, why at the beginning is it called God's Torah, and later on it's called his Torah? Because originally when a person studies Torah, it's God's Torah. But the more you study Torah, and the more it starts being part of your own Weltanschauung, then it becomes your Torah, because it becomes adapted to your understanding in the universe. Not in the sense of being tainted, but in the sense that everybody has their understanding of what the Torah means to them in life. And that's called your Torah. So the goal of the scholar is that the Torah also become part of your understanding, and then everybody has their unique addition to their understanding of Torah. So this is what Rashi says. Ukne lecha chaver. So Rashi says, the amri lechaver mamash. There are those who say it's talking about a friend, because it's better to be two than to be one. And why study Torah if you're one and you're not two? Remember, the Talmud is very critical about people study Torah by themselves, because when you discuss things, you'll learn a lot. So you need it's the story about, the Talmud tells a story about Rabbi Yochanan, who used to study with Reish Lakish. And when Reish Lakish died, so they brought him somebody else to study with. And this fellow who came to study with Rabbi Yochanan, who was, of course, a great scholar at that point, and the head of a yeshiva. So this guy, every time Rabbi Yochanan said something, he brought him 16 proofs that it's correct. Rabbi Yochanan looked at him in anguish and said, I don't get it. I know I'm correct. What do I need your 16 reasons to tell me that I'm correct? When I used to study with Reish Lakish, he brought me 16 criticisms of why I was not correct, and I had to prove myself correct. That's studying Torah. But you're just telling me I'm correct. What do I need you for? So you need to be challenged. So here Rashi understands the context of the friend. In other words, everything is the context of Torah. You need a rabbi to teach you Torah. You need a chevruta, a friend to study Torah with. And then what is the third one? Daned kol adam lachaf zechut, to see people meritoriously. Shekol tishma alav tomar letova. Ad sheteda b'beirur she'eno kach im ata oseh kach tani etcha mishamayim. Here Rashi slightly deviates, and he says, if you look at others meritoriously, then from heaven they'll look at you meritoriously as well. About the third part, of course, you could argue that, a human being has a tendency to justify things that we did wrong. The reason why we justify things that we did wrong is because we know why we did them wrong. We know why we made the mistake, and we understand the circumstances. So we feel sympathetic to ourselves. However, we have less sympathy for others. We're much more critical of others. So therefore, Yeshua ben Prachiya says, the same way you're not critical about yourself, don't be critical about others. So if I understand this Mishnah according to Rashi, so Rashi basically understands out of three statements, the first two having to do with Torah. Number one, that you have to acquire for yourself a rabbi, because it's not good enough to study by yourself. You need another opinion of somebody who is a seasoned scholar, who's going to give you understanding and really will also push you forward by light years in your knowledge. Because remember, if you have to discover the wheel by yourself in all areas, it takes a long time and life is short. But if you study with somebody who studied with somebody, a lot of things you'll see how quickly you're going, and it'll really help you formulate, first of all, get the knowledge. As the Talmud says, Kulam tzrichim lebalei chitin. everybody needs somebody who carries the wheat, which is a symbolism, which means everybody needs somebody who has knowledge, because only after you have the basic knowledge can you formulate your own opinions. And Aselecha Chaver, for Rashi, it's somebody to study Torah with again. And what is this idea of looking at everybody with a good eye and trying to see them meritoriously? For Rashi, this is a general statement about our relationship to humans. Now, if I go to the Maharal of Prague, so the Maharal has an interesting take on this Mishnah. So, because if you remember, he says there are three things that people have with others. Because remember, the first one that we're talking about before, with Yossi ben Yoez or Yochasi ben Yochanan, we're talking about your house. So, both of them were talking about your house. One said to make your house a house of scholars. Another one said to make your house a house which includes the poor, right? And Yoshuv and Prachiya and Itar Bailey are not talking about your friends, your acquaintances, your community. So you move from the house to the friends. So, but I want to give you in a nutshell the Maharal's take on this. Okay, without reading everything he says, I'll just try to give you in a nutshell. The Maharal, I think, takes a very unique perspective on this Mishnah. And he says, Aseh lecharab. Why does it say acquire rabbi? Even before we get to the Maharal, I have to say one other thing. People always say, look, my rabbi said I have to do it this way, so I have to do it this way. If my rabbi didn't say, then maybe, okay. But what do you mean your rabbi said? It says acquire a rabbi. You have to choose the rabbi. Now you have to understand why, in general, before I get to the Maharal's perspective, why do you have to acquire a rabbi? Why do you have to choose a rabbi? Because there are a lot of people out there. And remember, a rabbi is really a teacher from a Talmudic point of view. You need a teacher that you can connect with. Now, it's true, in Jewish law, after you connect with that teacher, don't go from posek to posek, legal expert to legal expert, like a shopping. Keep with one strand, with one line of thinking in halakha. But at the beginning, you have to find somebody who can zoom into your soul, who's on the same wavelength as you. That's aseh lecharab. Pick a rabbi who's on your wavelength. And therefore, the blame is yours. If you pick the wrong person, it's not theirs. Okay? You have to put in your 50%. You have to pick somebody who's on your wavelength, who will connect you to Torah and make it something which is palatable for you. And then that person, even if you disagree with them, you'll disagree with them on your wavelength because they understand you, you understand them. Okay? That's a very important point. Having said that, the Maharal says something totally different, but I actually agree with what I just said. But he says something totally different. I think this is also true. This is sometimes the beauty of these statements. Aseh lecharab, make for yourself a rabbi. Maharal says, everybody, I'll say it in my words, everybody needs to be inspired. If you find somebody who is that type of a teacher who inspires you in the world of Torah, make that person your rabbi, whether they have the title or not. That's why it says, Aseh lecha, make them your rabbi. It doesn't say they are a rabbi. The Maharal says, make them the rabbi, your rabbi, because they're going to inspire you, and that's what the rabbi is supposed to do. That is Aseh lecha, because we all need somebody to inspire us. Knei lecha chaver, make for yourself a friend, because everybody needs somebody to inspire us, and everybody needs somebody to share our moments of happiness and sadness. That's our friends. A friend is not a rabbi. It's different. We all know that. Just like a spouse can be your best friend, but doesn't have to be. Somebody I once had a discussion with someone, and they said to me, I want my spouse to be my best friend. I said, nothing wrong with that, but you might also need a best friend. So, it's a little bit different. There's a best friend, okay. There's definitely a difference between a rabbi and a best friend. It could be your rabbi is your best friend. That's not a problem. But I'm just saying everybody needs somebody to inspire them, and everybody also needs a best friend. And what's the third part? Judge everybody meritoriously. I'll tell you what I think on this third part. I think all three parts of this statement are talking about you, not talking about the rabbi, not talking about the people. Okay, the Maharal says it talks about the relationship to the other, to your friends, to your community. I'm okay with that, but I think the three statements of Joshua and Prachiya have to do with you. You need somebody to inspire you. That's why it says, Aseh l'charav, make for yourself a rabbi. You need a friend, because that's what we need in life too. You don't need a lot of them. And in fact, it's very hard. We can have lots of acquaintances, but it's very hard to have real friends. It's not Facebook friends, as we all know. It's people who are there for us through thick and thin. You're not going to have a lot of people like that in your life, but you need 1, 2, 3, people like that in your life. And the third thing is, see every person meritoriously. Now, okay, but what does that have to do with the first two? In my opinion, this is also a statement about yourself, which means we need to be inspired. We need to have a friend. And we need to know how to overcome our anger and being overly critical and satirical about life. Sometimes you have to give the benefit of the doubt because it'll help you as a person. It's not that there isn't evil out there. There is. But if you're going to fill your life with watching the bad news, as we've all gotten used to in these last couple of months of this pandemic, it's not healthy. Sometimes you have to just take things a little bit with a grain of salt and just try to give the benefit of that doubt, because it'll help us live our lives breathing better and with less anger. So sometimes when you look at the other person and you're less critical about them and you forget about their problems and deal with your own, it's a little bit easier, and it's a way to de-stress. Of course, there's some people who live off that, meaning it makes them feel good that they can put down the others. There are also issues like that. But in general, it's better to be less critical of others and to focus on our problems, and then we don't have to stress out about everything that's going on in the world. So I think that all these three statements that are connected. We need somebody to inspire us. We need somebody to share our experiences for the good and the bad with. And as far as the others are an important part of our life. However, sometimes take it a little bit with a grain of salt and don't be so critical of everybody else. Sometimes you have to give them the benefit of the doubt, and it will help you in your relationship with the others, and even when in your relationship with ourselves.